righty, welcome back everyone to another Wellbeing Wednesday. I'm really excited about today's guest and our topic. So we're just going to dive right in. And just to give you a quick overview of what today's topic is, as the weather's warming up and with Earth Day this coming month, there is no better time to focus on our environmental wellness. So we're excited to have one of our very own Be Well, Care Well participants, Rachel Parker from Ferncliff Nature Preschool with us today. So she is joining us and going to talk a little bit about nature, outside time, not just for ourselves, but also how to incorporate that in our classrooms with our own families. So I think we're going to have a really great conversation about that. And again, this may be for your own family, this might be for your workplace, or even with your coworkers, which can be really fun too. Nature truly is for everybody. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us today. And I want to dive right in and kind of hand the reins over to you and see if you can talk to us a little bit about what's the benefit of nature? Like, why is it so helpful? Why is it so important? Just kind of give us your thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, I think there are, if you were to Google the benefits, I mean, it almost seems like they're endless. It's fantastic for our visual health. It's great for our blood pressure. It's fantastic for mental health. It allows an environment that allows for reflection and meditation just because of the just the signals that you get from being in nature. You get vitamin D from the sun when you're out in nature. There's major physical benefits, even just the difference between walking on a sidewalk and walking off of a path that isn't paved provides different muscles that you have to use. You have to use certain visual acuity skills, to keep your body balanced and things like that. So you don't even think about the difference in like walking on a sidewalk or going on a hike. But really, in any way that you can get in nature, your body, your mind is just getting so many benefits from being in that. I think as a mom, as a teacher, I found that I was just better at both those things when I was outdoors. So much more creativity comes up, so many more questions, being curious, things like that. So those cognitive benefits too of that environment as opposed to being indoors. So yeah, I think the benefits of being in nature are endless, and I'm just hopeful today to encourage everybody to get out there as much as they can.
Yeah. And you know what? I I have a background in anatomy and physiology, and I didn't even connect how, walking on a sidewalk can be good, especially if you're starting and have maybe some balance issues. But if you're trying to maybe improve that balance and improve some of the muscular tone, challenging yourself just by walking on a path that's unpaved, it will help so much of those tiny muscles, like you said, in the foot, in the ankle, in the knee. So that can be a really great way to, without putting too much extra strain on the body, kind of level up your walking. I know a lot of our Be Well Care Well participants do walking, but maybe it's like, okay, we've been walking on the paved road. Maybe let's take a lap, walking through the dirt part or going off-roading, especially with the weather being so much nicer, we can start to actually go on hikes or go on longer walks outside. So maybe playing with paved and unpaved could be a really interesting way to kind of see how our body responds to it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool to think about, right?
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, can you tell us a little bit about maybe your journey of kind of how you found nature and how you've incorporated it into your life and kind of what that process was like for you?
Sure. I am a natural born Arkansan, so I've lived in the natural state my entire life. I grew up camping, fishing, doing all of those outdoor things that are just part of, I think, living in the state and just, exploring the Buffalo River. And, all those things are just part of my history, part of my childhood. But then I went off to college and had to decide kind of what I wanted to do with my life. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, there weren't a ton of options offered to me in the fields of outdoor, things, or maybe I just didn't really realize. And so ended up going to school to be a teacher. Taught for about 8 years in a developmental preschool program. I'm a special ed teacher. That's my original
Mm-hmm.
background. and didn't know that the model that I'm now directing even existed for educators, like that you could take preschoolers or young children outside and teach them in that environment. I didn't know that that was a thing. And so I was just sort of searching and looking for ways to get the kids I was serving to have more experiences, and ran across videos of schools in like Europe and in other parts of the United States who had kids outdoors. And I had been gardening with kids, like doing gardening projects and things, and always loved that. And it just added to my classroom and to my teaching so much. And so when I saw those videos, it was like a light bulb for me as an educator, to be like, oh, I've been in the outdoors my whole life. It's like, oh, it's a love and a passion for me. And now I can combine that with my, love for kids and, love of teaching. And so that's how I sort of came to this, and then just worked hard for a couple years to try to get this program started, convinced someone to let me, start it and grow it. And so 9 years ago, or we're about to go into our ninth year, we started the school. And as far as we know, we were the first of this model, which is we spend about 75% of our day outdoors, instead of in an inside classroom. And that's once that happened and we started the school, I mean, it's all history now, and we're just moving forward. So that's really kind of the journey that got me here. And I'm a much better educator, I think, because of it.
That's amazing. And so, because you talked about, kind of the model and this type of program, can you talk a little bit more about the specific model and kind of how it works in the day to day, and maybe even some of the impacts that you've noticed in this particular kind of model with children when they are outside so much of the time? So, just kind of describing a little bit more about Ferncliff and how y'all go about that.
Sure. We're sort of, there's two different models or two different schools of thought in the world of nature-based teaching and preschool. So there's a nature-based preschool, which means probably about 50% of the day is spent outside or as much as possible. But also there's still inside components to the program where you're bringing nature indoors to do a little bit more teaching. And then there's also what's called the forest kindergarten model. And that's almost like when you think of like the German original model of kindergarten and what kindergarten was made for, and that was children in the garden. And that's children playing, exploring in an open forest or field type environment. And so because we are in Arkansas and you have to be licensed, you have to have a building. And so you have to provide a nap time. Then we sort of think of ourselves as a hybrid of that. So from the time the kids get dropped off in the morning until after lunch, we're outdoors. We stay out the entire time. So we do our morning gathering outdoors, we have snack outdoors, we have lunchtime outside. Any teaching activities that we do are done outdoors. And then we really come in for rest time, and then we pop back out and we're outside again in free play until the parents come and pick up. So we really are outside as much as possible. The only thing that really sends us in are thunder and lightning, or severe cold with wet weather kind of combined, because that's hard to plan for. But our kids come with all the gear, our teachers come with all the gear that they need for whatever the weather might be. And so, yeah, that's really the model and how we do it. I think the impact on kids and the impact on educators is, I think for educators, it's almost life-saving. I mean, we know we're in a field where it's hard to keep it's hard to keep folks in it because the pay is low. It's a high stress job. And I think that if we can combat some of those things, maybe even with this model, that, you realize it's a lot easier to be around kids when they're not in four walls, when they have the space to move and to move their bodies in the way that they were, that they intend, to grow. To allow the materials that are always changing, because in an indoor environment, your classroom is always the same. Your materials are mostly always the same. Maybe you're changing up some things here and there, but every day when you go outside, there could be something new and something different to ask a question about, or, to come upon. And it's like a wonder moment or a curiosity moment. And so I think the impact on children I mean, it's fantastic to see how they regulate themselves, their behaviors, the language skills that they develop, because they're getting to use vocabulary that just wouldn't be there in the inside environment. You wouldn't have a conversation about scat from a possum, if you're inside, because that just doesn't happen. So that's really, I think, the greatest impact for them. It's a really awesome place to be with children and spend your time with them each day.
Yeah, and so I was going to ask, I'm going to kind of go back to a couple of things that you said because I think they're so important. A lot since COVID times, especially children, and how children kind of respond to grief in a lot of ways and kind of respond to that type of global trauma, a lot of times can come out in their behaviors. And so, we're seeing kind of a higher trend since then of, difficult behaviors in the classroom. And so I wanted to ask, how is managing their behavior in such an open space? Can you describe a little bit more about what that's been like because I think sometimes we think too, like, okay, there's a lot of logistics and watching the kids, when they're outside. But I kind of would love to hear more about your perspective on that as the lived experience of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things is we have pretty low ratios, probably better than most will find in a preschool program because we have kids in an open environment. So that's really important. So I think that adds to the benefit that the kids receive because it's not a class of 20 kids. And I think that kind of puts kids at a disadvantage anyway. You're sharing attention, with a lot of kids. You're having to figure out a lot of social dynamics, a lot of behaviors in a classroom. And so I think,
It's
yeah,
a hard thing to manage.
it is such a hard thing to manage. And so I think that's helpful. I think also the fact that in a classroom, the lights are constantly maybe a small buzz. There's never really a place that you can get away and find a quiet space. If you're a kid that needs to, do a one-on-one activity and have a chance to regulate, if they're feeling dysregulated, there's just not really the space for that unless you are in a building where you have spaces to take kids, to help with those things. There's also not endless materials. So there's only 2 dump trucks. There's only so many things. But when you're outdoors, there's 1,000 sticks, there's 1,000 rocks, there's so many leaves. So like the things that you can create and do, you're not necessarily having to get into those battles of will over sharing something. Or, if you are, then it's really easy to go, well, I can help you find more of that if that's what you're looking for. Also, the outdoors is really the only place where you can be fully sensory integrated. A lot of people don't know that, but the wind is blowing on your skin, the light is changing based on the clouds and the shadows from the trees. You're engaging your full body, you're using all of your senses at once. When you're in an indoor environment, your body kind of goes on autopilot, and so it's not. And so we see a lot of dysregulation in children. We're seeing a lot of sensory issues, things like that. And I think the outdoor environment is really the best place for us to help treat those things without really needing to treat them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And so, you mentioned a couple of different things, and I love how you're talking about your program and whatnot. And I wonder if, kind of taking a second too to say, okay, what are some ways that if we have educators watching this, either if you're with us live or watching the replay, they might have those higher ratios because that's what their center or what their program has. And maybe they are primarily an indoor space. How could educators and programs that have that structure, how could they start to incorporate more aspects of this into, it might not be possible to just fully shift, but there are other ways to be intentional. And again, you're kind of the content expert and experience expert on this call. So I want to kind of pull from you some ideas and some suggestions for some of our educators who are watching this with us.
Yeah, sure. I think as much as you can kind of rewild your playground space, that's a start. So planting, maybe you look out at your playground and you have no trees, you've taken them all away. So it's looking at, finding fast growing tree species or shrubs that you can put back out so that you can invite, insects are something that's super easy because you don't have to have a big forest or a field or anything like that to invite them in. If you put a few, if you plant a garden or get some shrubs put back on your playground or a tree, then you're inviting those species, even birds, back to your space. So it's looking at rewilding your playground. Maybe you're reducing the equipment that you have and focusing more on, mud type play or things like that. I think if you are wanting to go outside your playground and maybe in the neighborhood of where your school is, you start taking some sensory walks, and maybe you go as a class and you walk. And today we're just focusing on the things that we hear, and maybe there are things we hear that aren't natural, and then maybe there are things that we notice, like the birds, that are. You could, a lot of times I've told programs to put if you can, get your hands on like a wildlife camera, put it out in your parking lot, let it record what comes and goes at night, and then maybe you catch the few creatures or animals that do live in your space, and you start to learn about, even in an urban area, what animals, what habitat do we have, who comes here when we're not here, that kind of thing. Adopting a tree in your area where it's something, maybe you go out a couple times a week and you sit around the base of the tree as a class and you just notice together things that are changing about it, things that are different about it. You might start setting some track traps on your playground, where you put out a piece of plywood or cardboard and you cover it in flour and you put different food choices on it. And then you come back the next day and you see what came to check it out, and you start identifying those animals and those creatures that come and live in your space. So I think there's a lot of ways you can get creative, and you can bring nature out or in to your program, just depending on what your access is and what your resources are, and start connecting your kids and yourself as an adult to the natural tendencies of the space that you're in. You don't have to have access to thousands of acres or even 1 acre. There's nature everywhere, even in the cracks of the sidewalk. You can do a look around where you just look at a little picture frame and see what moves and what happens just even within that little 10-inch space. So lots of ways that you can still get involved and incorporate nature into your program.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love, the idea of rewilding, right? Just bring in little things. We're seeing a whole lot of like farm to ECE is a big push. Cooperative extensions, for those of you who are watching, are great resources for things like this. And I mean, honestly, even, certain fast growing species of trees, like you mentioned, that might be something where a program can maybe reach out to a local hardware store, or they could, if they're in Be Well Care Well, they can tell their coach that they're interested, and the coaches can even kind of do some outreach on behalf of the program to see if would they donate maybe one tree, or would they provide some sort of discount because it's to educate the children that is in the community that they serve. That could be something where it's more cost effective, but it's also engaging the community and telling people about the amazing work that our early childhood educators, are putting in to grow these minds, and saying, hey, can we work with you to get one tree out here so that they can also enjoy this and we can learn from it. And I like the idea too, because I think sometimes, we get so used to not having insects or animals and we think it's a bad thing. But what I love that you mentioned was it was the idea of taking the nocturnal animals with, like, there's no children there, there's not a safety risk, but that can be incorporated, and that can be an invitation, so it's safe, it's not, this big managing thing, but it's a really cool way to incorporate that, and like you said, have an invitation to the natural goings on. And so you also mentioned something else, and I kind of wanted to circle back. So we talked about how being in nature can affect the children in some ways, that our educators can incorporate that more if they're interested. Talk to me a little bit about the effect on your staff. Like, how are your staff affected, do you think, being outside so much of the time through their work?
Sure. I think there are oftentimes in a class, like if you were to look in a window in a classroom at a teacher, there's a lot of moving and doing for the children. It's very busy usually in that environment, and we're all trying to create those moments of, every teacher wants to create that moment of like, you take a breath, you're actually enjoying what's happening around you, what the children are engaged with, that kind of thing. And I think
Mm-hmm.
for our teachers in the outdoors, kids find so many little pockets and things to do and to be engaged with that it's really easy for a teacher to sit down and with a notebook get to really have observation time of what are these kids playing? What types of questions are they asking? Who's really needing to work on some social skills, like that kind of thing? And they can actually breathe in that moment and look around if they've created the environment in the right way. And if there's enough things to engage with, I mean, it offers them opportunities to do what we truly are supposed to do as educators, right? And that's observe, wonder, ask questions about our kids, figure out ways to, meet their needs or to extend their learning, that kind of thing. And so I think that's really what this environment helps teachers do. And I think because of the stress, the way it lowers their stress, and just your mental health and all those things that we talk about are good from the outdoors. If you're having all those things happen to you while you're in an environment with young children, I think you're just set up better. It just makes you a more successful teacher and gives you a little bit more manageable environment with kids.
Yeah, and something that was so interesting, and I feel like I'm just repeating a lot of what you say, but it's just so impactful, and I'm fascinated. You talked about the difference of being in the classroom, and in a lot of ways, because the onus is on us and as the educators to create all this space in the environment and create the stimulation. That's a lot on the teacher, but when you're outside, that actually the teacher has more space
Right.
because the environment is already created for them. So in some ways, it is you are able to be a little bit more reactionary and sit back and respond as opposed to having to bring all that in and use all that creative energy and management. And it's almost a little bit of like less managing the children and their experiences, but instead really allowing that space for responsiveness.
Right.
And so something that, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh,
cut
go
you off.
ahead. I was just saying that's it. That's the work, that's,
There we go.
yeah.
So I'm curious too, because again, what's so nice is that you've been in different early childhood settings, so you have that ability to share your experience and kind of compare in that way. How do you think this type of environment and the effects that it has on your teachers, how has that affected staff retention, staff burnout, that sort of thing? Because again, a lot of that's very common in early childhood right now. So I'm curious to get your take on those effects that you've observed.
I mean, in our program, we haven't lost staff to like burnout necessarily. Now we have the same issues as any program, and it's usually, that the staff pay, which is hard to overcome that hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
But we've worked really hard to try to get that to a better place. And we've had staff that have been with us 8 years. We've had staff that have been with us 3 and 4 years. And so we've worked hard to make those benefits for them worth it because they aren't leaving us because they're burned out. They love this work. And so if we can fix some of those other things, then we're finding that we have long-term staff that are staying with us, that have built relationships with our families, our communities, myself. And so we have a really beautiful team. And so we just keep building that. We keep trying to put the things in place to keep them here because it's not the work that's the reason that they would need to leave typically. That's the reason usually why they find us. The people that find us want to do this work, and they know what it does for them and what it does for kids. And so that's a pretty easy sell. And so I think for staff retention, that's, it speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I think that that's so interesting because again, we spend so much of our time at work, and I mean, statistics and studies galore about the benefits of nature physically, mentally, emotionally, all those things. And so, if we're spending so much time at work, why not also incorporate, even if it's not, all the time, which would be great because it sounds awesome, but even for those who are in different scenarios, it's like, how can we incorporate just a little bit more time? Like I know some of our Be Well Care Well sites, they after their staff meetings, like I think we were working with a hippie program and they were doing their weekly meeting. And after that meeting, before they went to a lunch break, they would all take a walk around the building outside. And I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't very much. It took maybe 10 minutes total, depending on how big the building is and how quickly or slowly people walk. But they found that they were more energized. They found that they were, because they weren't sitting in their same spots, they were socially connecting as well with different people that maybe they don't connect with as much, even though they're on a small staff. And they're getting a little bit of that vitamin D, they're getting out of the classroom. And it's something as small as that can be really helpful, I think. And, it's not just, oh, I have to become a weekend warrior, which I know my brain goes to that. I'm like, oh, I want to do one thing. Let me do all the things. So for anybody watching, and if you're in Be Well, Care Well, sometimes it's the small steps that really add to big impact. So just, I challenge everybody to kind of think about what's maybe one small way that we can incorporate more outdoors in our personal life or in our work life. I since the new year, I was like, because I work from home, so I'm always inside. But I was like, I'm going to challenge myself that I'm going to get at least one walk in. I don't care if it's just a walk around the complex. Like I'm going to be outside walking. And I do think that it is very helpful. And if nothing else, I get to enjoy the trees and be outside. If it's cold out, man, I get to wake up more than with my coffee. Let me tell you.
Yeah,
So,
don't stop going outside just because the weather seems frightful or changes. I think that's another thing too, is let yourself, let the kids experience all the different ways and types of weather that we have. Go out, even if it's not for long, go out and experience the rain. Go out and, bundle up for a minute and watch your breath. That's
yeah.
such a magical thing. And you can go out for 5 minutes and have that experience, and it may be something that sticks with you or sticks with kids forever as a core memory. So, I mean, yeah, and I think not letting the weather stop you is another important part of it.
Absolutely. And actually, that adds to the next thing I wanted to ask about. So, some people don't do nature. Some people, I don't like bugs.
Sure.
Sometimes they're just like, I don't like to be sweaty, or you know, so what could you recommend for people who maybe they're like, I don't like being outside, I don't like the heat or the cold or the bugs, whether that's in our personal lives or at work? What
Sure.
maybe recommendations would you have for someone who falls into that category, which is
Yeah.
totally valid?
Sure. I mean, and not everyone had the same experience as me growing up. I mean, I think it does start in your childhood. And if that just wasn't what your family did or like the things that you enjoyed, then yeah, you found other things in your life that bring you joy, and that's okay. But I think the benefits out like shine enough that we all can go like, oh, maybe that is something I can try to incorporate, even if it's just 5 minutes a day. I think the best thing anyone can do, we call it a sit spot. And that is finding a place where you feel comfortable outdoors. So maybe in your rocking chair on your porch, that's your sit spot, because that's a safe place for you as someone who maybe doesn't love nature, but is trying
Mm-hmm.
to encourage yourself to get outside more. Maybe for other folks, they are willing to go sit in the grass somewhere under a tree. It just depends on your level of comfort. But you find a place where you are comfortable, where you're not, nothing that is anxiety inducing, and you just sit. And maybe you extend that time 5 minutes, 10 minutes to 15 minutes. Usually a sit spot's no longer than 15 minutes, but you keep the same spot over and over and over again, because the more you do it, the more nature is going to get used to you being there, and the more experiences you're going to have. Like birds are going to start to realize that you come out every day at this time, you sit in that spot, you're a safe person, and they're going to go back to their normal behavior, and you might actually get to witness or see something that's really great or cool. You're going to get to just notice things about your environment that maybe you never have before, because you're intentionally going to the same place every time. And so I think that's a super easy way to incorporate the outdoors and nature into your life without having to really change much, without having to overcome some of those things that make you uncomfortable. So I think that's probably the biggest tip for folks.
That is so cool because I would go to some places, but I didn't think about, before we even started this, you and I were talking about how I've become an unofficial bird watcher on our balcony where I love when birds come. But if we're consistent, they're going to feel more comfortable coming closer. So I really like that, and I'm gonna try that myself. So um I cannot believe we are almost at time. I always have so much fun during these conversations, and you've shared so much, one about your personal experience, your professional experience, but just shared so much wisdom with us today. And so, really, I want to thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time. I know as a director, in a child care center, the time is precious. So, really, thank you for taking this time and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank y'all for having me. I was excited to be here today, and hopefully everybody has something they can take away from the conversation.
I know I do. I have several things. I have a mental list going on right now. And one of the things too, so if y'all are in Be Well, Care Well, if you're watching, something that if you like this idea, we as coaches have sometimes offered what's called a vitamin N nature challenge, or we have a state park challenge where we kind of partner up with the state parks where you can get a cool passport. I have mine. You can get, every time you visit a state park, you get a stamp. You can learn about it. Just found out this weekend that once you get 5 stamps from 5 state parks, you get stickers. So you get fun, things along the way. So if that's something that you're interested in as an individual or as a site, please reach out to your coach. We love talking about that stuff. It's so much fun. And especially with the weather warming up, it's a great time for it. So now that I have gotten off my soapbox of our state parks, which are so wonderful, as we close today, just as a reminder to make sure that you follow Curricula Concepts on Facebook and Instagram so you don't miss a thing like future Wellbeing Wednesdays. If you like today's show, please feel free to share it with your friends, family, coworkers. There was so much good information. I highly recommend that. It'll be on our YouTube channel, and it will also be on the Curricula Concepts Facebook page. And if you are a childcare program of any kind, please feel free to check out the link to Be Well Care Well application down below in the comments and apply. So we do have some spots open. So we would love to meet you and work with you. And also Rachel's contact information is down below. So if you want somebody's feedback on what it's like to actually go through Be Well Care Well or to learn more about any of what she has shared some of that information down below. So once again, thank you, Rachel, for being with us. Thank you all for watching and joining us. Next month is May. We are going to be having our anniversary special for Wellbeing Wednesday. So we have some very special things coming up. So be on the lookout on social media for that. And with that, thank you all. And I am wishing you well. Bye.
Bye.